I want to say we are living in a new Saudi Arabia. And I don't want to sound too American, but we are living the Saudi dream. In the 90s, in Saudi Arabia, as a teenager, I was one of the very few girls who had opportunities in sports in our very limited private schools. And I played in school. My uncle was my coach. So that's what we really did growing up in Saudi Arabia. But after I got married, had my first child, I went through postpartum depression. And it was a very negative and dark part of my life. And I remember one day, my husband looked at me. He was about to go to play basketball, and he said, "Why don't you go play basketball?" And really, in March 2003, that was the beginning. My first time to go back to the court after years of, after college. And the ecstasy that I felt after 19 minutes of just playing basketball with my ex-teammates and my cousins and my family, that really changed my world. I felt ecstatic. I felt like I was happier. I had more energy. I was very excited to go back to my daughter, who was a very quite severe colic and just would not sleep. My daughter was 2 months old, but I just felt so empowered, and I felt like I was a happier mother, a happier daughter, a happier citizen. And I'm not going to say that it was that one day that I realized this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my career, but I played for, I would say, for 2 years. There were no nurseries. There was so many. Saudi Arabia was a different Saudi Arabia than it is today. My mother worked, so she wasn't the typical grandmother. So there were no nurseries for me to keep my daughter, and it was just I was playing just for fun for 2 years. But I felt everybody on that court, all the women that were with me, felt so empowered and so much more happier than they were before they started. And there were very limited things to do. I mean, entertainment, you see today, you see movie theaters, you see walkways, you see women running on the streets, people cycling. The landscape in Saudi Arabia was not like that at all. There were no opportunities. There was no physical education for the millions of girls in Saudi Arabia. There was no opportunities for women to attend any sports events or stadiums. There were no strict rules for women to feel protected. Not that we weren't protected, but this was way before the anti-sexual harassment law, which really made Saudi Arabia one of the most safest countries in the world. So parents were afraid for their daughters to be out in the streets or to take a bike or to jog or take a hike. So to them, sports, the opportunities that we gave 22 years ago was really a beautiful opportunity and very limited. Hardly any entities in sports. I'm not saying there wasn't. Maybe there were few opportunities in schools, but it wasn't for everyone. It was exclusive for students or for the few universities that had very, I want to say, opportunities in sports, but they were like very hush-hush. You couldn't write about it in the media. Couldn't talk about it. Couldn't televise it. Nothing like it is today, of course. So 2 years after I started the team, the women's team, I want to say I realized that this is a mission because my daughter was old enough to go to school, or at least to nursery. And I asked around, I said, how can I get a license to do it as like a commercial, as something big and include so many women and their kids, their sons, their brothers, the youth. And basically there was no opportunity. However, I found a loophole in the system, and it was going through the Ministry of Commerce, not the Ministry of Sport. There was no Ministry of Sports. It was the General Presidency for Youth Welfare, and it was only strictly for boys and men. That's it. But when you go through a different way of reaching your goal, again, where there's a will, there's a way. That's how it happened. And I registered a commercial license 2006, and the rest is history. We grew from an establishment that functioned as a club that trained tens of thousands of girls and youth in team sports. We started with basketball. We ventured into football, the number one sports for males in Saudi Arabia. I really believe that basketball was the number one sport for girls at the time because it existed in the private schools. And I remember the first tournament that we ever did as Jeddah United. It was called the Women's Street Basketball Tournament. And thanks to documenting it in the Arab news, because the media, there was a self-censorship in Saudi media that never published anything prior to, I would say, 2009. But the Arab news, this was the internet. It was a Saudi English printed paper. The readers were the educated Saudi, the international community, and it was published. Our first women's street basketball tournament, we invited everyone in Jeddah who played basketball, the international schools, the Turkish, American, I don't remember exactly all the teams, but even the local teams, like we did, it was huge. It was amazing. And we got sponsors. It was like the beginning of a very big venture that really took me to so many different, I want to say heights. Our club, when fast forward post Vision 2030, was the gold winners in the biggest sports related tournament that was sponsored by King Salman himself, and we got first place. I mean, this is what we were building towards. Our first national teams in 2019, our players were half of the national team. This is how it was formed. I had so many, I want to say, identities. I was the non-professional athlete, so I played. I was the co-founder of the company. I was also the spokesperson. I was the government relations, so anything that I had to do, I did myself. There were so many things that I was working on at the same time as a mother. I brought my kids in their strollers, my daughter in her stroller, before I had her sister. So I was multitasking, but that's what women do, I guess. And it was exciting times because I loved impact. I loved to see the impact. People who would tell me that their lives have changed, not just women, but even for the youth, for young teenagers who came up to me and were like, before we came to the club or the facility, we were in a completely different zone, but it transformed lives. It really, really did. So the fact that the social impact was so powerful on two levels. Number one, on local level, you see how you're enriching lives. You're investing time and energy in something that is so beneficial. On a health level, on a social level, on a psychological level. But also, we were doing something else on an international level. Now, being from the city of Jeddah means a lot because Jeddah in Arabic is grandmother and is in reference to our mother Eve. So we've always been global. We believe in humanity as a whole, not just local, even way before. I mean, that perspective, I think I'm assuming I learned it from home, from my parents. They always thought global. So for the international community, when we scheduled our international trips, it was really about being ambassadors to Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia was one of the most misconceived countries in the world. This is prior to social media, prior to, I want to say, I mean, very, very limited exposure. What you saw in the media were women from head to toe walking by camels in the desert, which didn't really reflect the truth, all the segments and the true population of Saudi women. So for me, also on an international level and an international goal, I really wanted to not just change stereotypes, but really show the, true definition of Saudi women, different segments that existed that the world really had no idea about. And we did that when we went on international trips because we were covered by CNN, by BBC, by Reuters, by thousands of different media channels, 4,000 different channels of publications, 800 channels. And it was a very, very big deal. And we actually went from global to local. We didn't go from local to global when it comes to media, because our first exposure was CNN and BBC. Then came the attention of the local press. And we were contributors to the national debate of women in sports. And I'm proud to say that we contributed to this whole national debate and pushed the envelope towards making it happen, of course, until the, revolutionary, I want to say the word, announcement of Vision 2030. I understand that for this generation, it's normal that it's a given and it's normal for them. But for us, people who have lived the two eras, pre-Vision 2030 and post-Vision 2030, we have this sense of really deep appreciation of what we have today versus the Gen Zs who, turned 18 and got their driver's license. Getting your driver's license at the age of 40 is a completely different ballgame. And I always say that I remember the first midnight that I drove in the country on Saudi soil. And it wasn't about just driving a car or a vehicle. Really, it was about driving the nation and pushing for change and being empowered, being able to take charge of your life. And this is something that my generation highly appreciates and values. And I always like to say, I remember reading this in Reader's Digest years back as a teenager, and a man without a past is a man without a future. Of course, it is a person. And it's important, and that's why, honestly, I appreciate documenting the change. I appreciate documenting the transformation, the fastest and most successful transformation in the world, national transformation, 2016 to 2020, that you had skeptics about, but it turned out to be so smooth, so beautiful, and actually surpassed a lot of our expectations on our objectives. I remember the first time I went to the stadium, the first time in January 2018, when it was forbidden for women and families to attend. I took my kids, and it was one of the most joyful experiences in my life. Seeing the unity of the family, being on the field, watching the game live. And of course, I've been in different capacities, but this was the first time that it was actually, allowed for women, for Saudi women, for residents, for international visitors and tourists to come and attend. And it's just, I think it's, I think it's because of so many factors. I think the fact that Saudi Arabia is one of the most youngest populations in the world. So our youth, that was almost 70% of the population, were so ready. And it also proved that the segment that was opposing all these changes, the music, women empowerment, and so many things, were a minority. They were aggressive. And when the government went under King Salman and MBS announced the vision, and the rest became history, because there was no room for convincing anyone whether it was good for women to drive or right for women to play sports. It was just game over. And everything was going so fast. And the Saudi population was so adaptive in a way that we didn't even imagine that it was going to be that fast and that smooth. And we are very grateful for that. So there's talk about the making sure that we are still true to our identity. And as my father always says, we are all about modernization and modernizing, not westernizing. And it's very important. I believe it is the responsibility of the parents to make sure that we are true to our identity, our religious identity, our cultural identity, our national identity. So Saudi Arabia is different than any country in the world because there is no separation of church and state. So our constitution is the Quran. So by default, the religious values are integrated in our everyday life. And it's very important. Yes, schools play a role for sure, but even schools all over the world now, it's like education is becoming very different than it was when we were in school, due to so many things, technology, AI, and so many other factors. That's where parents come in. It is harder to be a parent in today's generation than it was for my parents. So yes, it's much more challenging. It's much more difficult, but it is something that parents really need to be hawks around their kids. It used to be safe when we were kids. My mother used to, leave us in the house, and we were in our rooms. We were safe in our rooms. Our kids are not safe in their bedrooms today because of what they're exposed to through the internet. And that's why it's much, much more difficult to raise parents, especially for the alpha generations. And Gen Z's got a bit, but for the alphas, for our grandchildren, that's going to be very tough, not just in Saudi Arabia, but all across the globe. That's why we need the education system to change its way of preaching and teaching. We need the media to change. We need to have more programs, more exposure to different, I would say, films and music. And even as a club, as a sports club, I feel responsible. We do a lot of events that really educate the youth today. We do so many. We do things that are related to of course, our national days, our religious days, and we try to do it in a way where it's fun, but it's deep, and we integrate who we are, and for our kids just to have it in them, even though it's harder because it's a different era. But I think it's doable, but we're still, I think, in that transformation phase where we're trying to find tools and programs and ideas to get to the generation and educate them and make sure that they don't lose that identity. I want to say that the world has never been united, in my opinion, the history of mankind, more than it was united during COVID, because we had the same enemy, the same fears, and we wanted the same goals, which is to find a solution for this epidemic. And that got the world closer together. Nations were helping each other, and it was beautiful to see that unity. And I think that for the international community, when they view Saudi Arabia, it would be nice for them to think beyond the women in black and in their abayas, and realize that we share the same goals, we share the same fears, especially as mothers, wanting the best for our children, the good education, safety, for them to be, for their well-being, securing their jobs, etc. So I think that it's important to focus on the similarities. Obviously, the beauty of the world is to have the different languages, to look at the world in different colors. There are so many similarities for us as human beings. And I always love to share that for a lot of people, when they look at Saudi Arabia, when they look at the religion of Islam, they think of it as an isolated religion or a separate religion. But in reality, we as Muslims view ourselves as an extension of Judaism and Christianity. Our kids are Moses and Jesus and Mary and Muhammad, and this is how we view these Abrahamic religions. So that would, in my opinion, have make the international community look at Saudi Arabia in a different perspective. They just open up their horizons and educate and read more into the history of the religion and of the culture and of the foundation of Saudi Arabia, because it's absolutely not like what it was portrayed for many decades. And we a lot of times make sure that on international dates, on the birth of the United Nations, on the anti-terrorism days, and so many different international days, we try to raise awareness. And I mean, for Saudi Arabia, I speak as a Saudi citizen. It's a very safe and a very peaceful country. Yes, in the Middle East, you have countries here and there who have, it's conflicts, and it's unfortunate, and that's why there's the association of the Muslim faith to the aggressiveness. But again, I think it's, generalizations, and I think it's more of ignorance, really. If people really, I mean, there are biases. You cannot change the world. You can't change everybody, but you can at least be responsible and take the time and energy at your capacity to really explain who you are. And there are many initiatives in the world that do a lot of, I want to say, like documentaries and so many other initiatives to really show the true case of whether it's a certain country or a certain religion. But here in Saudi Arabia, it's not the case. The conflict zones, it's, yes, it's around us, and nobody likes conflict, whether it's in China, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in South America, whether it was in Ireland, or there are conflict zones around the world. But of course, it's more emphasized when it's in the Middle East, just because that's very sensational, and also related to economic, motives, and et cetera, et cetera. But for Saudi Arabia, I mean, we are blessed to be a very safe and country that has opened up its borders to the world, really. Our tourist visa is, so many different nations get it from the airports, and people who come here tell me, oh my God, this is not what we imagined. This is not what we thought. We had a Russian player who came and played in our basketball team, and she was shocked because, like, the girls, when they practiced, they'd leave their mobiles on the bench. She's like, I can never do that. In the countries that she has been to, she's like, you just throw your mobile phones on the bench and go practice? Stuff like that. And it makes me feel like there's only one way to find out, for people to come for themselves and experience the culture and meet the people. And it's just getting to be one of the most, I want to say, interesting destinations in the world. What people don't realize is that it was Adam who first built the Kaaba, the house of God in Mecca, before Abraham. And the reason why I say that is because Saudi Arabia was known as the heart of the Muslim world, but it really is the heart of the ancient world. It's believed to have Adam and Eve, that they've met on the Mount Mercy in Mecca. And the pilgrims that come to Saudi Arabia are from all across the globe. American pilgrims, European pilgrims, Asian, African. So we are a melting pot of so many different cultures. And that's why when you come to Saudi Arabia, you will be very surprised to see that we look very different. You'll find people who look Turkish, people who look Persian, people who look African, Chinese. That's because they migrated to be in the Holy Lands, in Mecca and Medina, before the borders and before nations were even established. So in that sense, we as a culture are very open to all the cultures, because we are really a mix of the world coming to the Holy Lands. So we went to Kevin Hart, the stand-up comedian, and he was shocked how everybody in the audience understood each and every joke. English is obviously the #1 international language, and you'd be surprised how almost everyone I know in Saudi Arabia either speaks it or understands it. Thanks to even for people who have never traveled a single trip outside the soil of Saudi Arabia, because of the internet, because of the movies, because of the songs, so that you find people with absolute American accents, for example, and who speak it and understand it and has never traveled. It's really a global world, and it's a global neighborhood, where in Saudi Arabia, I want to say that English is very, very prevalent as a second language. And especially with tourism now, people are really putting an effort to be able to communicate with the rest of the world in English. I believe it's very important to go back, because women, there are so many women who really contributed to the development of this nation, who have not been documented. And I think it's, especially at a time where it was still taboo for women to be in newspapers or really come out on local television. So it really gives a landscape. It tells the story. It shows how what the beginning was, and it will evolve into I think bigger ventures, and it's going to be very inspiring also for the generation to see the struggle of the journey, I should say, of women in Saudi Arabia in different sectors. I'm sure some people are private and some people just don't feel comfortable going on camera, but within the sector, you'll find somebody who is open and is willing to share their story and their journey. There are so many amazing women in Saudi Arabian sectors that really have come a long way, considering all the challenges. And it was through the challenges that made it so innovative and so beautiful, and they even went global. So I think that digging deep into that, you'll find a lot of treasures in Saudi Arabia.